Hey, how's it going, guys? This is NatePick, and welcome back to my tech world. So today I actually wanted to kind of talk about a topic that will seem very controversial, but if you'll listen to my reasons behind this, then you will kind of understand where I'm coming from and my philosophy that is behind every operating system. And so today I want to talk about the reasons why I use macOS even though I still use Linux. So I actually got introduced last year to macOS thanks to a friend of the channel, and also I would say a friend in real life, War Thunder, and also he does have a channel, so you should go watch his content at War Thunder's Nerd Cave. But he had a 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is actually sitting in front of me right now, and I'm using it to just read notes so that way I can see what I'm doing and kind of follow along to a script, because I find that if I don't, which I'm doing now, is I ramble. So but I'm also making a point. But one of the things that he did was he gave me the 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's got a dual core Intel CPU in it. It's terrible, but it still works very well for like Monterey, which is what I put it back onto, and I don't have any issues out of it. So even though I wouldn't say a love for Linux because it's an operating system, and I'll explain that later on, but even though I have a deeply rooted connection to Linux and I use it all the time, every single day, the reason why I use macOS, one reason is I have been a musician since I was 5 years old, and when it comes to actual audio production, there's no one that's even close to macOS. It's not even remotely close. Audio production on macOS, we coined the phrase in Linux that sometimes certain things just work. When it comes to audio production in macOS, things just work. And the reason why is because, well, Apple computers really have been the standard for most audio studio productions. So you have things within the core audio, there's no jack voodoo, there's no pipe wire, or is it pulse, there's no, Lord forbid, if you're trying to configure ALSA, good luck. Multiple interfaces, they just work. Most of the time when you buy an interface and it's for audio, it's going to be for macOS. Now they will include a Windows version, but I have seen multiple times where the Windows version doesn't have all the drivers or all the features that the macOS version does, because a lot of people use their audio equipment on macOS. That was the standard. Can it change? Yes, but there would have to be enough people willing to switch to something like Linux to force the audio companies to move to Linux. That's the problem that you have. So for now, audio, it's not close. It is nowhere close. Matter of fact, I'm recording this with this microphone into my mixer to a MacBook Air. It's an M2 MacBook Air, which funny enough beats the 16-inch MacBook Pro like hands down. But I'm recording to that directly, and the reason for that is because it's just that good. Now the next thing is that there are certain apps that I use that are not technically in Linux at all. There is some that are in Linux, but you have to kind of do a workaround to get to that point. The biggest one for me is Adobe. I have tried my best to learn GIMP. I have tried my best to make it my main Photoshop type editor. It's not good. Okay. I add 5 layers and it constantly crashes. I mean, I've used multiple different OSs. I've used different packages. It still crashes. That's a problem for me because I like to multi-layer my thumbnails. I like to multi-layer anything that I'm doing as far as professionally on my business side. I have to have something that's stable and that will work. Sadly, it just doesn't cut to where Photoshop is. It's not the same. Now, I do know that technically, yes, they have done a workaround in Wine. Shout out to the developer for that, that is allowing you to actually install the applications for Adobe on Linux. But that's still a workaround. The fact of the matter is, Adobe was built on macOS. I mean, that's literally where they started at. That was their bread and butter, was macOS. So Photoshop, even though it's buggy at times, way more stable, way more easier than trying to do a workaround on Linux. Let's be honest, it's still a workaround. So one of the biggest things is DaVinci Resolve. And the reason why, even though, yes, it does work on Pop! OS. I mean, I have the placard back there, Pop! OS, by the way. And yes, I use this to edit on. One of the biggest problems still is codecs. For example, one of the bigger ones is the AAC codec, which stands for Advanced Audio Coding, if you don't know what that means. So the AAC codec, what Linux actually does is they basically looked at the codec itself. They reversed engineered it to where that when the video file, like if you're using VLC, a video file sees that, it will reverse engineer it in Linux, and it does it really fast. So you'll never be able to tell, but it does it so that that way you can hear the audio come through, and it actually plays through your speakers. The problem is that still technically a workaround. And so part of the issue is because of that codecs, it will actually not allow you, even though I have the studio version, which is the paid version, and it's working on Linux, it won't allow you to use it and edit that in Linux at all. So the only ones that you really could do, well, the best one that you could do is FLAC, which if you notice when I edit the podcast, I have to edit everybody's audio in FLAC. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to tell what it is. So in order to basically get Resolve to work properly and support other codecs, I also use a MacBook. And that's because everything is supported. Everything will work in DaVinci Resolve for me on macOS. Now, technically, yes, I could do this in Windows, but I'd rather not touch Windows with a 10-foot pole. Now, unless you have some kind of, actual workstation that has a multi-core CPU and a massive, RTX 5090 or 4090 or whatever, you would actually be surprised that a lot of cross-platform apps actually work better on macOS because of the Apple hardware and that it's tuned to the Apple hardware versus on Linux. Of course, one of the biggest ones I just talked about is DaVinci Resolve. And then, another one, shockingly, Blender actually works incredibly smooth on Apple Silicon. Now, if you have an older Intel Mac, it's not going to do that. But for the newer Apple Silicon Macs, it does a pretty crazy job. I've never seen anything like that. So kudos to Apple for making a very good chip, but you're still a sorry company. I don't have any other way to say that. Now, it seems like that you might be saying, well, why do you even use Linux? Well, hold on, I'll get to that point. But let's just be honest that in reality, GIMP is not as close as Photoshop. Kdenlive is nowhere near as good as Resolve. It's not even close. And I would say that technically something like a DAW, which is it's a DAW, which means it's a digital audio workstation, it's still nowhere near as much as Logic is. With that being said, that gap myself, I would say that Reaper kind of closes that gap, and Reaper is cross-platform, and it does incredibly well on Linux. But when it comes to actually plugins, that's the key. Plugins on macOS just works. I have a plugin. I actually have a VST called Steven Slate Drums 5, and it's so that I can plug in my electronic drum set and get the sounds through my computer while I'm hitting the pad going through MIDI. Now, most modern drums have MIDI through USB now. And so that's the big thing. You literally just plug in a USB port into your monitor of your actual drum module and then go straight into the laptop. And then as you hit a pad, it will assign whatever MIDI pad that is. And then it'll apply the sounds. But at the same time, there are other things that you can add to a certain plugins to adjust the sound, or maybe add more compression, or maybe add more reverb. You know, the big thing in audio is like if it sounds terrible, add more reverb. Like that's one of the things they do. And plus they jack up the audio. The was it auto tune, whatever. I don't ever use that, but that's something that they do. Now, with that being said, like I said, there are actually plugins that do work on Linux. So you can do audio production on Linux. It just works so much more smoother on macOS because, once again, that was the standard. It still is the standard. So the next one, I'm going to talk about the actual reasoning behind me even buying the M2 MacBook Air. And that's because of my business. And so I needed something that had battery life that would last all day long. And I didn't really have to plug it in all the time. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to Apple Silicon, there's no laptop that's even remotely close. I can literally keep this thing unplugged for 2 days and use it. And by the time I have to plug it back in, it might be at like 38%. Now, there's a caveat to that. When I'm talking about work, I'm talking about just like emails or just browsing the web or looking up something. That kind of stuff. If you start playing videos and you start playing audio and you start, you keep running through all this stuff, you are going to eat it up. For example, if I edit in Resolve, it's going to eat resources and it will dramatically cut down the battery life. But I can actually do a full edit podcast for hours and still at least have 40% battery. Like, that's crazy. I would be plugging it in with the Windows laptop for sure. But at the same time, the insane performance per watt that these silicon chips can do is crazy. It's like, it blows my mind. I've always said that 8 gigabytes are not enough in modern times. This MacBook Air has changed my mind. For most people, 8 gigabytes is enough. Problem is, I'm not most people, so it's not enough. I need probably like 32, to be honest, and a stronger GPU. But that's neither here nor there. Now, another thing, and this is kind of a big one that a lot of people don't think about, that is actually silence. So with the Apple Silicon, because it's a MacBook Air, there's no fans with it, and it doesn't really get hot nearly at all. And so whenever I'm actually working and I'm actually doing something, it doesn't really still get that hot. Now, if I render a video, it will, but most time when I edit, I'll actually render out on the Linux machine, just because AV1, and for some reason Apple still has not gotten to where you can use that encoder to actually render your videos out. But you can't, unless they change it in the new ones. I don't know about the new ones. I know with the ones that I have, you can't. But I have a RTX 4060 in this one, so on my Linux machine, I can render out an AV1, and it will absolutely greatly compress a file and make it usable to where you can upload to YouTube. With that being said, it is better for me to edit on the laptop because I'm on the go quite a bit. Unless I'm at home, then I'll edit on here. So the fact of the matter is, because it's such near silence, I don't have to worry about the fans going all the time. I don't have to worry about the fans actually kicking up and you can hear it through audio. I don't have to worry about any of that. I can just hit record. It will record my video. I can edit my video. And at the same time, it will never make a sound. That is something that I didn't realize when I was younger. I didn't care when I was younger. I mean, I had servers in my room. They were loud. I didn't care. But as I'm getting older, having that peace and quiet, yeah, I actually kind of care about it now. The other one is that technically macOS is a lot more polished than actual Linux. And I'll give you an example, is because macOS is just macOS and it's made for that particular hardware, they can optimize a lot of things for that hardware, for that operating system. And whatever you get in macOS, that's most of the time that's what you get. Now, you can make some changes and stuff. I understand that. But for the majority of people, they're not going to do that. So what you get in macOS is what you get. With that being said, do I like that philosophy all the way? No. I love the fact that Linux is very much open And even though there is fragmentation that's there because you should use this or you should use, that doesn't matter to me. Just I'm thankful that the option is there. Now, as someone that is also a terminal user, I do like the fact that in macOS there is homebrew. And honestly, if it wasn't for homebrew, there's a lot of things about macOS. This would be a rant video if it really wasn't for homebrew. But because of the applications that are in homebrew and I can use it through the terminal, that actually has helped me a lot to actually kind of convert a little bit over to macOS. And I've been able to make my workflow a little better. I'll just say it like that. Now, I will end with this. There is a reason why I still use Linux. Number one, I have servers. I'm never going to get away from the fact that Linux servers are the best. They're the best in the world. There's a reason why they are. It is the standard for most servers. It's just so stable and so good that, I mean, nearly any application that you can think of that is for a server is for Linux. So I have servers. I'm never going to get away from that. When it comes to actually development, yes, technically, a lot of people do use a macOS for development, but Linux, I mean, Linux literally has everything. I mean, I don't think there's anything in development that Linux don't have. So there might be some obscure app that some company uses, but as far as just mainstream development, a lot of them do use Linux. So that is something that is available that is really nice. Now, the next one is something that I don't think a lot of people actually take into consideration, and that is custom workflows. But more importantly, the fact that you can use modern custom workflows on older hardware. That is a big thing for Linux, is the fact that Linux works on older hardware. It just, I mean, I still use floppy drives, okay? That's not normal. I understand that is not normal, but I still use floppy drives because Linux allows me to, and I like doing it. I like the little click. I like hearing it spin up. So I keep using it. Plus, I know it sounds weird, but it does help me to focus. It really does. If I'm doing a project and I'm trying to write a script, I can save that script as a text file, put it on a floppy drive, and that's it. So, and of course, the last thing about Linux, I mean, it's a given. It is freedom and full control of your system. With Linux, it doesn't do anything unless you say, hey, I want to do this. Then it will be like, okay, sure. You do whatever you want. If you decide to, for some reason, attach one kernel to an LTS kernel and change it, then decide to change it back, it'll do that. They don't care. It's your system. If it breaks, it's also still your system, so you're going to have to fix it. But at the same time, I would much rather have that freedom and that full control of my system versus than being locked down. Now, I know that sounds like, well, you're making a case for Linux. Yes, I am. There's a reason why I still use Linux. It's for that reason. But at the same time, I'm just explaining why I do use macOS for certain things. Is it my daily driver? Technically, yes. Technically, yes, it is. But it's also not the only thing I use every single day. The biggest one is I still use my Linux machine. When I want to listen to audio, I turn around and listen off of my Linux machine. For one, I've got some very expensive speakers that sound incredible. But at the same time, I wouldn't do audio production on it just because all of my plugins work on this old 2016 MacBook Pro. I say old. I have systems from the 90s. Scratch that. Let's just say macOS old. So I kind of came up with the phrase that explains how I use Linux and macOS. Linux is where I have built my life. macOS is what I use to produce the fruits of it. So even though, yes, I have built my entire business around Linux, most of everything that I can do, I do on Linux. But macOS, because of the MacBook Air and I can travel with it, is where everything I've done in Linux becomes the fruit of my labor, and I produce that fruit and I harvest the fruit from my MacBook Air. So this is why I say, and I'm going to end with this, As much as I like Linux and as much as I will never get away from Linux, you have to understand that it's still just an operating system. It's not something that you marry. It's not something that's your best friend. It's just a tool. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I still use Windows because of certain reasons, don't look down on them, because that's not what we're about. That's what nobody should be about. The fact of the matter is, as much as I have a problem with Microsoft, the company, as much as I have problems with Windows 11, if it works for that person, then they need to stay there. Now, do I encourage them to, hey, if you got a spare hard drive or do you have a spare system to try out Linux? Absolutely. And I will be there to help them to learn about Linux. But in the same sense, it's still a tool. I'm not married to it. So that's the reason why, even though I use Linux, I also use macOS. So in conclusion, I do want to hear from you in the comments. I do want to see what you think about. I know that, like I said, this is a very controversial, probably type video, but at the same time, you got to understand, to me, it's just a tool. It's just something that I use to get my work done. So if you have any other kind of thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear it down below. If you agree with me, great. If you disagree with me, cool. You know, that's part of the reason why I'm using Linux, why it's so fragmented, because nobody can agree on anything. But the fact of the matter is, at the same time, I still enjoy using Linux. I enjoy using macOS for when I need to work. But other than that, that's all I have. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully I'll have a different video soon. I've got several scripts I got to go through. So yeah. God bless. Peace.